Welcome to In the Round, Conversations from Lament to Hope. My name is Reverend James Ravenscroft, moderating this conversation here with Dr. Carmel Doyle, a professor here at Queen's College, Reverend Derrick Bishop, Deacon at the Anglican Cathedral of St. John the Baptist here in St. John's, and the Reverend Dr. Joanne Mercer, Provost of this college. Now, that being said, these folks are here not as Bible scholars or academics or clergy or anything else, more so here as people sharing what is on their hearts. And I invite you to consider yourself sitting here too in this chair. Be part of this conversation. If you need to, pause the video so that you can collect your thoughts and add your own input within yourself into what is being shared here. So what is on people's hearts? Well, here at Queen's College, we're very conscious that there is a heaviness on the hearts of churchgoers across the province, regardless of what denomination they are. It's heaviness over closure of churches, churches being sold, over abuses that have taken place within the church, be it sexual abuse, financial abuse, abuse of power. It could simply be that we're aging as congregations and our congregations are shrinking. Whatever the grief is on the heart, we are feeling it deeply. And so we want to give a space here then for us to lament. Lament meaning to share grief again and again and again if necessary, but always with an awareness that God is leading us through our grief into hope, leading us into a brand new day. And I don't know about you, but grief is very much a reality we feel at this time of year. There's a sense of what used to be at Christmas time. Many of us think to ourselves, oh, if my kids would only come to church, or maybe this is the year they're going to keep coming. And yet we also know on our hearts, chances are they won't. They might show up again next Christmas, maybe at Easter. And we know that they're good people, but we also know that they too have walked away from church because they too feel this grief on their own hearts. Within all this, we wonder, what's going to happen to the faith that we hold so dearly? What's going to be our future? What about all those dreams that we have for our church, for our families, for our communities? So with that in mind, I invite us to listen to a story about a dream. And it comes to us from this Christmas Advent season. It's from Matthew 1, verses 18 to 25. This is how the birth of Jesus Christ took place. When Mary, his mother, was engaged to Joseph, before they were married, she became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. Because he didn't want to humiliate her, he decided to call off their engagement quietly. As he was thinking about this, an angel from the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because the child she carries was conceived by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Now, all of this took place so that what God has spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. Look, a virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. Emmanuel meaning God is with us. When Joseph woke up, he did just as an angel from God commanded, and he took Mary as his wife. But he didn't have sexual relations with her until she gave birth to a son, and Joseph called him Jesus. So I want to give you a few minutes just to think about that story we just heard. And then when you feel ready, what are your initial thoughts, reactions to this reading, especially given the grief that so many of us are feeling as church here in Newfoundland and Labrador?
It's funny, because of what you had said before, when I heard it this time, all I could think of, Joseph must have said, this is not the life I had planned. Mm-hmm. This is not the way this story was supposed to go. This is not the life of faith that, and what happens when we're good, right? He's a righteous person and things don't go the way we think they should go or the way we think God would want them to go. When God's plans doesn't make sense with our plans. Mm-hmm. A lot to reconcile. Just wake up and say, okay, I'm good with that. I'm not sure I can make that adjustment in my head quite as fast as Matthew makes it appear that Joseph does. Mm.
What came to my mind initially was, as I studied that scripture this past few weeks, I thought of Joseph, that challenge that he had, basically stepping outside of his Jewish tradition that they had at that time, 2,000 years ago, where he was almost called to abandon the Mosaic law, where you would basically, being espoused or engaged at that time meant you were literally married. That was the understanding. But you didn't have sexual relations until you would actually cohabitate. So obviously, Mary's becoming pregnant had to be a big challenge to him. And the law basically stipulated she could be stoned to death. Mm-hmm. So his stepping outside of that makes me think, well, as Christians, we need to be stepping outside to traditions that we've probably held for so long. And as I thought more about this, I see myself as being probably fairly conservative in many ways in the church. But what is the gospel message of Jesus? Did Jesus say, go ye into all the world and build buildings? No, I don't think so. He told us to preach the gospel, and the gospel message that I feel he gave us is that we are to love one another, we're to do good to the poor, but basically the marginalized. And I think the church over the past few decades really has moved towards obeying that commandment by looking at the marginalized people in our society. Could be LGBT people, or it could be other groups, the poor, the homeless, prostitutes. So we're seeing, I think, the church moving more in that direction. And not that it didn't do that in the past. Certainly in Newfoundland, and really, I guess, in Europe as well, we follow their traditions. The church was important in education, healthcare, but it also had a lot of power. Mm-hmm. And power, as we all, that cliche, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think that sometimes leads to the financial abuse or the sexual abuse and so on, when people have all that power perceived by the community. But thankfully, I think that this particular scripture reminds me that we need to probably examine where the church is, and is that our calling? Are we obeying the gospel message, and how we need to change our actions to be more Christ-like? That's what it meant to me.
Okay, thank you.
All kinds of things were racing through my mind as usual. But this past semester, one of my students is the rector of the parish of Provost, where they were so devastated. And she, in the days immediately following, heard story upon story, tears upon tears, and always the question, why is God doing this to us.
Mm.
Why is our nice ordered life gone? And at first she said she tried to answer, and then she realized that wasn't a question that they want answered. They just needed to ask the question. And then she said really an interesting thing came to her. And she said it wasn't her doing. A man from the community came up one day, a man who's not a churchgoer at all. And she met him, I think, just outside the church. And he, like many, was saying, you know, this is, why is this happening? She said by that time, if she thought anyone could hear, she says, it's happening because of climate change. And we actually do have something to do about that. But she said, as she listened to him, he said to her, he said, this church is right up on the hill here in the community. It can be seen everywhere. Why don't you just turn on the lights in the nighttime to let us know that there's something staying lit?
Wow.
So she did. And she said the response to that was incredible. She said, we didn't care what it cost us. We turned on the lights. And the devastation is still there. But she said that lit church said something to the people. Now I'm going back to the gospel. My experience, that's all I can say. My experience of the church over the last decades has been in some ways that we've taken so much for granted. We think we've got the best show in town, all of us, every one of us, no matter where, we all think ours is the best and things are pretty good until something happens. But I think that until something happens is important. Like when we talk about the gospel, the good news, when you're complacent, we don't really need good news. In order to know what good news would be, you have to pay attention to what the bad news is. You have to be able to name it, to see it, and then maybe, and I say maybe, depending upon, like, the student had the good sense that after the first couple of times not try to answer the question, but just to let it be. But until the good news has a context, I don't think we can be church. We can't be that lit church on a hill until we know what the bad news is. And then we might be able to respond. Like, she could have turned on the water in the church, but the water in the church has nothing to do with the news per se. It was the light that was needed. So I think, to me, I mean, Joseph had everything going pretty hunky-dory until he didn't. And it was only because he was righteous, he was going to do it quietly. But it took something else, listening to something from outside, the angel, to begin to see stuff in a new way. Not in the way it was expected, not in the way it normally plays out, but actually to give space for something new. So that knowing what the bad news is, so we might have a clue as to what the good news is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then being willing to get the inspiration from outside, from places we haven't traditionally, or we're not expecting.
Right.
So I think that's what that right now says to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. As I'm listening to the three of you speak, I'm struck by how Matthew's story is told very much in the context of the nighttime.
Yeah.
I mean, so Joseph has a dream, and later on, you know, Magi follow a star, but the only way you're going to follow that star is if you're traveling at night. And so we have in this story the sense of being shrouded. Not darkness as a bad thing, but darkness as I don't know what is.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's how so many folks across the province feel. The church was a light on the hill, right? And now it feels for many that, well, there's maybe just one light bulb left on, and that one is on its end. And what happens when that one goes out? Where will the light be? So there's a sense of, we don't know what's happening, what's going to be the future. So I'm wondering how this text, or even just how on your own heart, what is it offering beyond just the text itself into our particular context?
I know we recorded a podcast earlier the same passage, and when Derrick was talking and Carmel was talking, the line from the text that kept coming to me is God with us, Emmanuel, right? That in unexpected places, in ministry to people that maybe church doesn't think it should be ministering. All these places we're saying God is with us, not just with me, not with just with the church, but God with us. And I think that light that in that church, in the midst of all that darkness, reminded the people that it doesn't mean that there isn't darkness, it doesn't mean there isn't pain, and it doesn't mean there isn't sorrow, but it does mean that there is no pain, darkness, sorrow greater than the good news that God is with us.
In the sorrow.
In the sorrow, yeah. I mean, you got to, not only is it a period of darkness, but it's a period of occupation. I mean, these people are in an occupied land, run by soldiers. I mean, it's very not unlike the things we see on our nightly news. It's not like a lovely, peaceful period of time when they're given this message, God with us, nor is it a peaceful time, when Isaiah gave that original message of Emmanuel, God with us, that, it's like we need the darkness. We need to speak it. The power of speaking the pain and uncertainty and question, not as a denial of God with us, but to give us new glasses to see how God is with us. Because maybe God is with us in ways we don't expect. Perhaps that's the greatest part of the good news. But until we can get out the pain and the sorrow, like power of lament, the power of screaming why, the power of the question, not really any need for a solid answer other than knowing that God's sitting holding your hand while you're screaming, crying, I don't know if there's anything.
The light, thinking of the church in Port of Basque, it's a physical thing, it's from a building, but we're called to be the light. So let your light so shine before others that they see your good works, that you may glorify your Father in heaven. So I see we need to be that light as well, through our actions, and the church through its activity, probably within the community. It might be, with organizations that have no relationship with the church at all. Like I could say, let's say the Canadian Mental Health Association. Can we work with them to, improve a lot of people who are marginalized because of mental health problems? Different food banks and so on. And there are churches, of course, are very much behind these activities in the community, these social activities. I don't think the majority of people recognize how much the church does in the community. So maybe we need to turn on the lights a little bit more, to show or demonstrate that the church is still there. It maybe churches are closing, but the church is the people. And we are doing things to improve the lot of people around us, because Jesus called us to love our fellow men.
And
like
women.
I said, women.
And women.
And women. But not only that, and I think, and I find this within the Anglican Church now, when we do a baptism, one of our vows is we're called to remember creation.
Yeah.
And the importance that I think the church has really and to speak out about the destruction of the environment. That's one of our, I think, our callings that we need to recognize today, that we need to do something not only for the for all people, but for the world itself, the earth itself. And really by doing that, we're helping people, be it climate change or whatever. So maybe we should all be looking at how we can spare the environment. What are things we can do to help? And, we contribute towards food banks and these other things. And we need to, I think, recognize as well when the church does things like opening up a place for people who work on the street, making their living, that, they have a place to rest, to go get a meal or whatever. Yeah. And the church has done that sort of thing, but I don't think it's well known. We haven't probably shone our lights enough.
Yeah. Carm, your thoughts?
I'm thinking, I know all of this is true and it gives me hope.
Yeah.
It gives me hope. And at the same time I have that hope, I am hearing so many voices of so many people who are so disillusioned, wondering where we're going. Is there a we that's going anywhere? What does it mean to be part of this, what we call church, these followers of the way? Are there any of us doing that anymore? And why is it we've got a whole generation and more for whom that doesn't seem to be significant? For the last 30 years, as I've been going in and out of different events, things that I may take part in, every single time without exception, at the end of every single event, when you're having your cup of tea or you're gathering up your stuff to go, there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 gather around. And every single time I hear the same thing. My kids don't go to church anymore, but they're good people. So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing the real, sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's disappointment. That's their own. Sometimes I think it may be that they're trying to convince not me, but this thing we call the Christian community, the church, that their children are good. And that, so a question I have is, if these good people, and they're there, and I know it, and I'm seeing it, hearing it all the time, are they not followers of the way too? Is not the church something other than what we have conceived it to be? I was thinking, as you were speaking, of another gospel story, little parable from another writer, Luke, talking about the yeast in the bread. Now, most of us, when we're having our bread, don't think about the yeast, unless you do what I did last week, which was used old yeast and didn't get what I wanted. Then I thought about the yeast in the bread. But most of us don't think about that notion of our job is not about us. Our job is about the flour and the salt and the sugar that you put in that bread. And are not these good people? My children don't go to church, but they're good people. Maybe they're yeast too. Maybe like Joseph, we can only see what we expected. We can only see in terms of what has been, and from the has been, we can't even begin to imagine a future that looks different from it. And then something happened to Joseph and to Mary and to the world.
I can't help, but a friend of mine told me a very similar story.
Yeah.
And she said that the person was very upset, and she asked about the things that their children did. And like they had community suppers, they raised money for different things. And so she said, so your kids aren't going to church, but they are the church,
Exactly.
right? They are living the gospel. They are living out all of the things that you taught them. And I think that's a major shift. I think you're right, just like Joseph did, that that this is not necessarily what the church is doing, is what the people are doing. Right? So many people are doing all kinds of gospel things, shedding light, feeding the hungry, taking care of one another, not always in the name of a church organization, sometimes just walking down the street, sometimes as a part of another organization, but they are being church, right? And I think the season of Advent, it's about birthing something as well, right? And so we're called to birth this new thing. But in order to do it's hard to do the new thing if you're holding on tightly to the old thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's a part, I think that's why lament is so important, because it helps us let go of the old thing, right? Like it helps name, okay, I love this, but it's not working, right? I had this dream of church, but that's not the way it's going to be. God is doing a new thing, and may I be as bold as Joseph to go along with it.
So Joseph in the story is as much the kids that aren't going to go to church beyond Christmas Eve, as well as the mom or the dad or the pop or the nan asking why the kids aren't going. And it's just, we got to sit with that. We got to wrestle with that the way Joseph did, and see where God is leading us. Where is that eventual hope? How is it going to unfold? Joseph didn't know. Mary didn't know. Jesus probably didn't even know until it happened. And that's the place we sit in this Advent time.
And I think that looking to the unknown is scary. It's frightening. So it's frightening to the parents who don't see their children involved with church and so on. And for those, I know I do some work with food bank care, and that's run by Roman Catholic and Anglican parishes. And two parishes are closing. One is as a result of the legal, events that have occurred here with abuse and so on. One church is closed, another is closed because they just can't afford to run it. An Anglican parish, so people are lamenting that loss. The people who are involved with the food bank, but yet they are involved with the food bank, and they are parishioners of these different parishes, and they're out there doing work. So they're actually doing the work of the church. The building is going, we're outside the building. I think as former Bishop Jeff Peddle said, the church has left the building.
And maybe the churches aren't being closed, maybe they're being transformed.
They're being transformed.
Well, maybe
and
it's
that's what's happening.
And I think that's the thing, we sort of see it as a hard ending, but it's not a hard ending at all. It's like planting the bulb this time of year, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going in the darkness, but something's going to come.
Yeah, but
Just
still
gotta
scary.
Wait. Oh, scary! You gotta wait.
Yeah. That's when we were talking about this originally, and we decided. We'll find out how wisely as this proceeds throughout the church year. But we thought we'd take one time each of the church year's seasons, and this notion of Advent. And I have to make reference to this beautiful hanging that your friend got.
Hello, Daphne.
From Twillingate got brought.
No, from West Pond.
West Pond. Okay, different.
Daphne Thompson, West Pond.
Okay, there you go. Creator of this beautiful. But the whole notion of Advent is that in between time, and waiting, and wailing about what you don't have anymore, as well as hoping against hope that something new will happen. But as you said, Joanne, until we let go of the old, we can't put our arms out to embrace the new.
think that's probably a really great line to close with. So we invite you to continue to be part of the conversation for this season and for the seasons coming up as we express our lament, calling us forward into hope. So thank you to the three of you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.